It's great to catch up again with Claire Miller from the New South Wales Irrigators Council. How's it going, Claire?
Yeah, very well. Very soggy, of course, in Sydney and surrounds today, but, things are a bit better over the divide.
Yes, and certainly when it comes to the inflows into the basin, storages are looking healthier than they have for some time, but from an irrigator's perspective, are we happy with the opening allocations for this water year?
I guess, there's a lot of disappointment out there, I think, that there wasn't an opening allocation of 100% for general security licences in the Murrumbidgee and in the Murray. I understand why. The dams are full, much fuller than they normally are at this time of the year, and I'd expect that if the negative Indian Ocean dipole holds and then La Nina develops, we could be looking at flooding. But you've got full carryover accounts, absolutely chock-a-block, and that's what's taking up space in the dam. So that's the reason why the opening allocations have been less than 100. I would expect that they will be 100 by November or February, but it just comes down to some of the water's going to have to come out of those dams to make room for higher allocation. So it's disappointing. We would have hoped that the department would not be so conservative and would say what I think everybody knows, that we are going to get to 100 at some point this year and perhaps give people more confidence to plant out on that expectation.
When it comes to the carryover, is that sort of, does this highlight in a wetter cycle that maybe we need to rethink just how that policy is handled because it's sort of predicated on a more drought or just a regular season rather than a wetter cycle?
Well, I think carryover has been a feature of risk management for irrigated farming for a very long time in the southern basin. And so farmers know how it works. And obviously it's really important during drought. And if you have a very wet year like this, yes, you can have very high carryover, but that is still water that's available to people who have that in their accounts to get started with planting.
Well, looking just more broadly at the system, as we say, there's plenty in the storages. Just what's your general observation about the health of the basin in terms of the river flows, but also what this means when we're looking at the basin plan in 2024? And is there going to be a bit of resting on people's laurels thinking, well, we don't need to advance the basin plan?
Not at all. We've got a new federal government that's come in. They've made a number of noises about being committed to recovering more water from farmers for the environment. And so we are very focused on the base plan, very focused particularly on issues such as the water resource plans and the another 450 gigalitres being recovered. We go through these cycles. It's wet and then it's dry. The next drought is only a matter of time before that comes through. The basin plan covers all those different climatic scenarios. So it remains absolutely a priority. The good thing about the wet conditions now is it is an opportunity now for the last couple of years to be really using that environmental water to improve the resilience and to really build that up in all those ecosystems, ready for them to sort of be in a better position to survive through the next drought. But as I say, we're still very much focused on what happens with the implementation of the basin plan next under the new government.
Yeah, when we had the federal election campaign in May, if I can paraphrase and excuse the pun, the state Labor government and federal Labor effectively said that 450 gigalitres is going to come to South Australia come hell or high water. And even speaking with the former water minister, who's now the Liberal leader in South Australia, David Spears, he said, look, we want to keep buybacks in the toolkit in case we need it. So that's not good news for those further upstream.
I'll just remind you that there are actually other state governments involved in the Murray Darling Basin Plan. We have a Labor government in Victoria who is equally adamant that there will be no more water recovered from the consumptive pool because of the adverse socio-economic impacts of doing that. And they're completely in lockstep with the New South Wales coalition government. So it's not just about what South Australia may want on the basis of what it was promised back in 2012. There are other states involved here.
Yeah, and my point, I guess, is the federal government seems to be on South Australia's side on this one.
I guess that's not quite how I read it. Certainly the federal government in its election campaign and its commitment said that they want to get that extra 450. They want to deliver the basin plan, on what they call in full and on time. But they also made it very clear that they want to work with communities. And they want to get all stakeholders in the room to work through what's possible and what's not. The thing about that 450 gigalitres being promised to South Australia back in 2012, that was a political promise to get South Australia on board. It's based on a modelled run that assumes that all constraints, so that's all physical, legal, regulatory, our constraints, and environmental constraints for that matter, are all relaxed and don't exist in the system. So what would happen if you added 450 gigalitres water recovery target? Now, that's not actually the real world. In the real world, those constraints relaxation is not just about bridges and infrastructure, but it's about getting voluntary flood agreements, flood easement agreements, with more than 4,000 landowners in New South Wales alone. Now, that's going to take a lot of years and a lot more goodwill in the community than we currently have. I think a lot of those basin communities, particularly in the New South Wales Murray, trust and goodwill are in short supply. The Basin Plan has had huge adverse impacts for those communities. So, these constraints can't be just wished away. And we have the Productivity Commission very, very clear in 2018 in its report about the folly of continuing to try and get the 450 gigalitres when it can't actually be delivered. So you have water recovered, it's unusable. We think that the way forward on this is to focus on what's already occurring on the ground. The Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder is very cognizant that constraints are not going to be relaxed anytime soon. I think there's work that needs to be done to address them, but that's going to take years. In the meantime, they're getting on with the job of actually working with the irrigation infrastructure operators, so like Collie Amberley, Murray Irrigation, Murrumbidgee Irrigation, the Renmark Trust in South Australia, to have agreements with them and to work with them to use their infrastructure and their channels to get the environmental water where it needs to go. So they're working around those constraints. You've got great programs like the Bitterns in Rice program that's being undertaken by the rice growers, the rice industry. This is the way forward. It's the creation of what the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder describes as a mosaic across the landscape where you have environmental outcomes and land and water management complementary with irrigated agriculture. We think that's the way forward, and that's actually going to deliver the environmental outcomes of the Basin Plan without necessarily meaning that you need more water, and without this blind adherence to just, this idea, you just add water and everything's going to be okay. Well, that doesn't address biodiversity decline when you've got 90% of your biomass in the rivers, your fish biomass, is carp. So all you're doing is adding water for them and not addressing what the impact is that they have on crowding out native fish and affecting water quality, and that's just one example.
Just looking more just looking broadly at the things we've talked about already, the carryover situation, needing headspace in the dams, and talking about infrastructure. If we are heading into possibly a third successive La Nina season or a negative Indian Ocean dipole, do we need to be talking about whether we need to increase water storage infrastructure, raising dam walls or new dams for the next cycle that we might have like this one we're having now?
I think we've seen from experience through the Millennium Drought that in the Southern Basin, they've got very, very large headwater dams there. And remarkably, they did keep those river systems flowing even during the worst of the Millennium Drought, when if you hadn't had those regulating structures, the Murray River would have dried up for several months during the summers, as it did before that infrastructure was built. If we go up into the Northern Basin, though, you don't have those huge headwater structures, and town water supply is absolutely acute. The need for investment into shoring up the town water supplies, particularly for towns along the Murray Darling River. It's an unregulated river. It does dry up from time to time. That's part of its natural cycle. But it's what the last drought showed us writ large is we need to be looking creatively. And putting the money into investing in those town water security facilities.
Right. Yep, Claire, thanks very much for your time today. I need to keep moving this morning, but appreciate that. And we'll see if we've got any improvement in those allocations in the coming months, as you mentioned.
Yes, pleasure to speak again. Thanks very much, Ricky.